Hi there and welcome. I'm Delane and I'm here today with Consciousness Mercredan, which is channeled by Trance Medium Francis Evans. Today we're going to speak about the fields of influence and how we can become more aware of our own fields of influence. So, please like this video if you enjoy it and subscribe to keep updated. Feel free to add any questions or topic suggestions in the comment box for future videos. Okay, now we're going to cross over to Francis and see what Mercredan has to say to us today. Over to you, Francis.
Once again, it is my privilege and pleasure to come and spend these few moments of your time. As we have said many times, everything is interconnected, interdynamic, and interrelated. One perceives others in one's field, in the characteristics of the role that one prescribes for them. They behave as you wish. They impose upon one's main character in ways that bring about new perspectives on reality, enough to begin a conversation.
Thank you, Mercredan. What we'd like to talk about today is to follow on from that notion of our fields of influence. So today, if you could do that, would you help us understand how we can become more aware of our own fields of influence?
One can begin at either end. The cosmic field is noticeably called the background radiation. Science has prescribed this, has realized that all of history is contained in that dimension, but has been unable to, shall we say, interpret what it all means. At the other end of the scale, one begins one's journey, shall we say. One comes in at the core of one's being, that is, without any preconceptions, into one's first interaction with the fields of influence, that is, with the parents, the mother, the father, the siblings, and so on, all of which are giving information. Each one is delivering its own perception onto the new spiritual identity. You begin to take on the characteristics expected of one, whether they are comfortable, that is, in alignment with one's own internal thread, as it were, one's purposeful thread of evolution, or whether not. So one begins to prepare one's journey by moderating oneself and moderating the field of influence one is engaging with. In this way, one produces one's first container for the core being. That is one's first, shall we say, boundary of defense. One imposes one's will as best one might into the field of influence that is contained. That then, in the first instance, one could say is the family dynamic. Everyone within that dynamic is in the same boat as such, with their own first boundaries as they influence the field and are influenced by the field. So it is then that one discovers who one is by what one becomes, if you understand what I mean. So one's fields of influence are a two-way street. One then is within a wider container. The boundary of the field of influence of the family day structure, as it were, is then engaged in becoming the unit that it wants to be perceived as within the wider framework then that might become part of the wider family, the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents, and the cousins, and so on, all attempting to infiltrate, to affect, to create a story within a story within a story, and so on. One's perception then is moderated in all these fashions. One joins in the community then. The community contains many, many family fields of influence that are affecting the operation of the family dynamic. Which zone you live in? Is it higher quality, lower structure, lower finances, and so on? These fields of influence are affecting all the way down to one's personal structure. One has, in most cases, forgotten who one is. Do you understand? All of these pressures, all of these defense lines are being operated at the expense of the purpose one came into being. And this is why spiritual evolution begins by returning home. The idea that one is returning home to some spiritual structure outside of self is not returning home to who am I? Beyond it all, when you begin to take this direction, one starts to discover a core notion of who I am. No projections out into the world. No need, if you like, to create a safety barrier because, shall we say, if there is a need for safety, if one is not, shall we say, secure, then the return to the core is not achievable. Does this make some sort of sense?
Yes.
Use the body. So shall we then say, when you begin to dive in and leave behind, you begin to see that you have been affected, that you consider your options in respect and relationship to the wider wholes of being. Do I fit into my culture? Do I fit into my social stream? Do I belong? Do you understand all of these characteristics? One realizes one has altered one's being in order to achieve this state of acceptance. As if, because the, shall we say, as you come into the fields of influence, one is moderated by the need for this acceptance. So what occurs, one ceases to accept one's being at the core and takes on all of, shall we say, the dressage that is needed to be accepted in these greater fields of influence. Does this answer many questions?
Yes.
Or even throw up many more questions?
Yes, it does. It does. Thank you. So is that the understanding that we're becoming aware of our losing our core? Is that part of our evolution, to lose the core and then regain it when we return to beyond?
Of course. When one returns home, shall we say, to the core, one first of all discovers that you are in a universe of cores. You understand? Everyone has a core. Everyone has taken on characteristics to fulfill the notions around them. Do you understand? To fulfill the characteristics of all of the novels they are part within. But at the bottom of the structure, shall we say, all cores are connected to the unity of consciousness. Everything else, shall we say, are identities that are structured within the storyline of one's interaction with the fields around one. Shall we say, then when one comes into the fields from the core experience, one perceives it as such. One understands that everyone is acting in the parts that they have been moderated to accept. So judgment then of others simply cannot exist, because one realizes, of course, all of this has been a playground, an experiential playground to explore the qualities of interaction so that one is best able to navigate the physical experience. Do you understand? One comes in to experience the life from these positions, from these projections, from these perceptions. And yet at the core end, one is clean, as it were. One is not tainted by all of these ideas. Human then arrive at the understanding that everything is connected. Do you understand what I mean? So that whatever something is occurring in my life, within my field, has been part of the conditioning that surrounds everything. So every life experience at the boundary of one's field of influence is the challenges, the shall we say, the defense system provides. So then, if we begin to meditate, to find the core notion, where is my beingness come, one starts first of all to experience how life has affected myself. How did I draw to me every experience based upon the boundaries and the perceptions of those that, shall we say, occupy different zones of fields within fields. Shall we take an example? If you have experienced the world of having enough of everything, and you arrive in the social national field of a continuous nation, shall we say, where you have to occupy with those that have far less. Now you will find the two fields of influence are defending against each other. The form of that defense might be perceived very different. You understand, one might experience the other as attacking, which is the need for the defense. And yet the other will experience the first as attacking, needing a form of defense. So there is the beginnings of conflict. Does this make sense?
Yes, very much.
So, shall we say, wider fields of influence are not without identity. The characteristics of the fields determine their interactions, behaviors, and so on, as if they were individuals, as they are. And in recognizing that, then one can begin to unwind one's position in any of these fields of influence. So shall we say this? If you stop for a moment and you consider who you are, then you begin to perceive your, what you would call your good points, your high points, your low points, and your failings and faults and all of the other considerations. When you identify with them, you begin to experience the container in which these defenses were developed. So one's faults are often what is needed, taken on board, accepted, in order to fit inside of the family conception of itself. So one identifies with, joins in the family conception, and interacts with other fields of influence, either in joining or in avoiding. You understand, there is an interplay that is pulsing as the fields interact with each other. One may come in contact with those that separate one from the family dynamic. One is cast out. Even in the casting out of the family, one is still affecting its field of influence. Now there is a gap. Now there is a missingness, or there is an anger, or all these different emotional responses to what occurred within the field. The individual has broken free of one set of constrictions and arrives in another set of constrictions. All of this builds up. So the advice is always to consider one's responses to the world around one. How is one reacting to what one perceives, the characteristics of each element one can identify. There are my friends, and the characteristics and what one has had, how one has had to mold oneself to belong, and the enemies, how one has had to perceive in order to exclude. To understand all of this is pulsing and forming a new consciousness. Human then is awakening to the wider dynamics, shall we go as far as the planetary field of influence. So shall we then take the planet has a field that contains different, disparate and conflicting groups who either acknowledge their structure, that is, they are in harmony with the living being, that is planet, or they are out of harmony, and as such then the planet adjusts its field, pressuring groups, changing events, and so on, because the planet itself has to meet its obligations within the solar system field of influence. To understand, each planet then has its characteristics and its purpose, and each one expresses those characteristics within the greater field, affecting all things within, and so on.
Thank you.
So one constantly returns home. When one is out of conflict, even as one perceives conflict with in various fields, one walks as if it is something that has been chosen to affect. Staying with one's core inner condition, one senses the connection and the love for all sentient beings. Anything more?
So wrapping this up, so with the experience of our inner core, which is connected to all of consciousness, and at the same time experiencing the wider fields of consciousness and their influence on our core, is the motion or the optimum way to evolve in this is to integrate our core with that and become more aware.
I want to say the more that you can understand the influences that have played out on one's expression in the physical body, the more one is not affected by it. So one takes responsibility for the content of one's novel display. You understand, one writes the story without taking sides in any dispute. One takes the purpose of, shall we say, demonstrating love for all beings. Do you understand what I mean? Then one can walk, as I have said in the past, like the teacher, the story of the Daniel in the lion's den. One can walk because one is not separate from. One is in the space of belonging.
Thank you. That is powerful. That's enough.
Is that enough for today?
It is. Thank you.
Then once again, let us pay homage for all those that continue to work for the divine by working on themselves to experience, expose, and accept their characteristics and choose which they are going to carry forward. Then thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Mercredan. Wow, that was amazing, wasn't it? Well, thank you for joining us today, those who could join. And if you enjoyed it, please click the like button and subscribe if you'd like to keep updated. And if you're interested in learning more about our private channeling sessions, the link is in the description below. Well, we'll be here again in another 3 days where Libby will be talking about Mother Nature and her protector, the planetary guardian. Well, that sounds interesting, doesn't it? So thanks again, and we hope to see you then. Bye for now.